Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this Textile Talk podcast. I'm Gail Cowley, and I'll be your host today. Joining me for this episode is textile artist Emily Jo Gibbs. Just to give you a little bit of background before we start our chat. Emily Jo Gibbs has established an international reputation for her delicate silk organza applique. In her current practice, she creates hand-stitched portraits and still lifes with a graphic quality, observing the quiet beauty of the overlooked, gently advocating the value of making by creating work that celebrates people who make things, their skill, dexterity, material knowledge, and their creative problem solving. Emily first started working to this theme for Collect Open in 2018. She makes work to commission and for exhibitions and projects. She's currently artist in residence at Trinity Buoy Wharf. She's a member of the 62 group of textile artists, Contemporary Applied Arts, and the Art Workers Guild. Between 1993 and 2006, Emily made luxury handbags. Works from this period are in the Victoria and Albert Museum, the Crafts Council collection, and the Museum of Fine Art in Houston. So Emily, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Textile Talk. It's a real pleasure to have you here.
Oh, it's great. It's great to be chatting with you, Gail.
I wonder if we could just start things off by you telling us a little bit about yourself, how you came to textiles and perhaps what you were doing in your previous life.
Okay, yeah, great. So I've been a maker. That's how I sort of partly describe myself all my life, because when I grew up, that was really what I enjoyed doing. So I've sort of pursued that throughout my career, and I didn't study textiles. I studied wood, metals, and plastics at Wolverhampton. And then my first career, I was making high-end evening bags, and that part of my life kind of ground to a halt a bit when I had kids. I've over the last maybe 20 years now, I've kind of maybe not quite that long, 15 years, I've sort of steered my practice to making flat work, I call it. So pictures in textiles, and I've got a bit of a passion for silk organza, which I really enjoy using because of all of its good qualities.
So that's really quite a transition, isn't it, from creating luxury handbags and then moving over to flat textiles, so from 3 dimensions to 2 dimensions. Do you think that your 3-dimensional process with the handbags actually fed into the 2 dimensions? Do you think it helped the process of the transition?
Yes, because it was sort of, I mean, the whole organza love affair happened. I mean, that was fabrics that I was using for the handbags, so I had stock of that and in lovely colours. And I suppose I was just inventing ways of making the images that I wanted to, show. And it seemed like the organzas was a really good vehicle for that. And previously, when I'd been making my handbags, I'd always, been thinking about images on surfaces or different ways of creating, not exactly fabrics, but I was definitely had to be, because the handbags were small, I didn't really have the buying power to go off to an Italian mill and buy a roll of some gorgeous fabric, because I was, I didn't have those quantities. So it was about being inventive about surfaces and decoration and how to create colours for different collections. So all that language, I think I was using in the handbags already, and then it just developed from there, but I wasn't having to then sew it into a three-dimensional thing.
Because very often I think people generally think of the 3 dimensions as being the most difficult, because you've obviously got a lot of planning to do, you've got a lot of structuring to do actually to keep something in the right shape and whatnot. So it's possibly more unusual, would you say, to transition from a 3D to a 2D medium?
I've never really thought about it like that. I think the route that I came through my sort of I think I was sort of I kind of uh, I was I like the idea of making something useful rather than just an expression of myself, even though my handbags weren't very practical because they were always like really small and decorative, but somehow that sat easier with me making like a product like that you could then offer to people that they might want to, have for a party or something. That at that time of my life, that seemed like an easier thing to do. And I'd learnt the metalwork when I was on my mixed media course, so I was kind of making my own frames, and I think in quite a 3D way. Yeah, so I feel like that element of making three-dimensional things sort of came quite easily, or I enjoyed figuring out how to make those things.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I think it was more making something really personal and
Yes.
wondering how I would make that a career that seemed more challenging at the time.
As you're actually using your hand-stitched silk organza, you're using the applique technique with it and creating a very delicate layered effect. Could you sort of walk us through that process? And obviously it's quite a unique style, how you developed that?
Yes, I sort of knew about, although I didn't have this sort of formal textiles background, I did know about applique and making pictures by cutting shapes. And I was making some handbags, the sort of ones that were really least like handbags and more like a conker or a dandelion. And I was exhibiting those along with work I'd made in a sort of transition bit, which weren't handbags at all, but more objects, but based on nature. And I think I just joined the 62 group and I was looking at making work that would sit along. I like to exhibit those object type three-dimensional pieces in the idea that they could be exhibited like a nature table. I liked that whole aesthetic and dynamic, and I thought I could make some drawings, some textile drawings that sat alongside those. And I had this idea I kind of liked also the idea of elevating the humble. So the idea that you might do a drawing of a stick in a jam jar and really celebrate the stick that might be overlooked. And so I was kind of I would I made a drawing, the pencil drawing, and then I discovered that by overlaying the organza, you could then draw and paint on that organza and use that as a vehicle to transfer your drawing onto textiles and then stitch that onto a solid background so that it was no longer translucent. So that's sort of how that began. And then I made some portraits of my kids and I was cutting out pieces of organza. And I think I'd done that with the jam jars as well and just had sort of quite broad swathes of colour over the linen or over the cotton between that top layer with the drawing on. And then I discovered that I could cut the organza in really accurate shapes, which was extremely pleasing. And then so that has just developed over time, that kind of. And then I got totally into the discipline of having the cut shapes and what I could do with those and how they layered and created other shapes and other colours and different tones. And so I sort of moved away from the mark making in paint and towards this sort of collage of silk organza pieces. And most oftentimes the cut pieces are trapped with a white layer over the top, and then you can stitch around the piece and it doesn't fray, and you can work in this very sort of tight, accurate way that I've kind of lent into for making a lot of that work.
You say that you've developed a way of cutting it very accurately. Do you stiffen it, or is there some treatment that you do before you cut it out?
No, I mean, that so people who come across silk organzas will notice that they're different qualities, and I prefer what is seen probably in the fashion industry is a less good quality one, where it's got a slightly thicker fibre that's more loosely woven, and they're a bit stiffer. And when I first started doing it, the Chinese and the Indian organzas were like that, and the kind of European organzas were more fluid, finer fibres, more closely woven. And then over time, actually, the Chinese factories have upped their game to be more like a European one, which is, I think, less less good for what I'm doing because they're more wriggly. um, but I cut the shapes when they are together with a piece of paper, and that allows you to cut really accurate shapes if you cut the paper and the organza together. Although sometimes when you take the shapes off the paper, then they do kind of warp. But I just kind of, I don't know, fiddle around with it and pull them back into shape and do it that way.
So do you have a whole stash of different colours for organza, or do you dye your own or paint your own?
So a bit of both. So I have a big stash of stock colours, I would describe them as, but it does dye brilliantly. My friend Bridget says silk organza is hungry for dye, which I really like that phrase. So I have done a project using natural dyes, sort of vegetable dyes that I've made myself, and I did a project where I made a piece called Rain, which is a long linen banner with all small little pieces, shafts of different coloured organzas that I've hand dyed sewn onto it. But I'm still slightly nervous about the colour fastness of those dyed ones, and I don't use. I'm not a dye expert. I haven't gone down the road of using a chemical dye or not homemade dye to create colours. So I tend to buy coloured fabrics, and then use the ones that I have, maybe layering them together or singularly, or using the stitch that I put on top to then influence my colour palette.
And as far as I'm able to see from the pieces that I've seen of yours, you use hand stitch. Do you ever use any machine?
No, well, I don't use any machining in the art. I might machine a strip on to be something to do with the hanging or the framing, but I don't. I love the hand stitch process. I love placing the coloured stitches. That's what it's all about for me, really. Yeah, I like the slowness, and a lot of my work now is about celebrating other people who make things. And we all know that making takes a long time. So I'm kind of really leaning into that idea that you celebrate people by taking the time to make the work about them. And there's a kind of mirroring, I think, of skill, really, or the idea that it takes time to acquire skills, and it actually takes time to make things.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is your Value of Making series, and you celebrate the skill and dexterity of artisans in general, don't you? What was it that inspired you to focus on that theme, and how do you choose the subjects for your portraits?
Yeah, so that's a lovely question. So I made it. So after I'd finished the handbags, I sort of, dived,
I know what you mean. It's
jumped
fine.
in, and I made a whole lot of portraits about my family, and then I made a whole load of portraits about my community, and that I did portraits of the kids that were playing in the street at the time, and then I hooked up with somebody called Bridget Bailey, who's another textile artist, and at that time we were both looking to sort of we'd both been in the fashion industry, I suppose, and we were both looking to steer our practices away from fashion and more towards being artists. And so we set out on a collaboration, and I thought I was going to make actual portraits, do embroidery of her face, and she was a bit reluctant to let me do that. And then, so in the end, I chose our pin cushions to depict us. It turned out we both had quite similar needlepoint pin cushions people had given to us that we used, and they just seemed like a really nice way of sort of showing our similarities and the joining it, the collaboration of the project. And then that just set off this whole idea that you could, in fact, depict a maker through their tools. And then it's just like an enormous subject, isn't it? So how do you choose those people? So I just, I'd applied to do collect, and I'd sort of landed on this number of 7 portraits of 7 makers. So I wanted to have makers in different disciplines. And I just chose work that I liked. There's some of the people I knew, like Sarah Porvertaft, who's a jeweler I knew. So I thought, oh, well, she'll be the jeweler. And, and then some people I didn't know, like Michael Rue, who's a glass blower, and he lives. So I sort of knew of his work, really liked his work, and he happens to have his workshop quite close to where I live. So I chose him. So it was but the in was really choosing people whose aesthetics I appreciated, really.
Were they all quite responsive when you approached them?
Yeah, they were all great, and it was lovely actually, because it can be quite. I think I felt quite isolated as an artist and maker at that point, which is quite normal. I think lots of people. Well, I discovered it was normal in the course of doing the project, really, that unless your business has grown to a size where you've got a lot of staff or other people that are working with you, then it can be quite isolating. So it was just really great. So I just sort of reached out to them and said, I'm doing this project, would they be interested? And they all were very generous with their time. And so that was really great. Yeah. And that project's sort of ongoing, really. I've done sort of various different iterations of it. And I'm now doing an artist in residence thing that I could talk about if you like, which is a sort of continuation.
Absolutely. Yes, that would be wonderful.
So I'm 6 months in, and it's just been extended for another 6 months. And I'm at a place called Trinity Buoy Wharf, which is on the Thames in East London. And it's an artist community that was set up when Docklands was being developed. And the trustees had this great idea to reserve a bit of space for an artist community. So I started there in November with a plan of making work about the community that are there, the community of makers, really. And it's become a sort of procession of people. So before, when I was like doing really portraits, like people's faces or portraits through tools, this is portraits, but more of small figures. So you get the whole body of the person. And I've got about 25 people, I think, so far, who are doing different things. So there's people restoring boats there. There's English National Opera. I've got their prop makers based there. There's independent designers and makers, sculptors and mosaic artists and textile people. And then there's people that come to the wharf, like civil engineers who might be doing repairs or building work. And they're all on this kind of procession or queue or whatever it is of little figures of people.
So is this the same as your boat builders series that sort of highlights apprentices and foremen at I think is it the Burton Boat Yard?
Yeah, so that was down in Lymington. So that was a project that I did. It sort of overlapped with COVID. So I think I started the project in so that Lymington project, the boat builders, not the same as what I'm doing now, but similar in that I'm just. So I suppose this all goes back to your question of who do I choose to depict? And it's about finding people who are makers in maybe different settings. So there's obviously people who are artists and artisans who might be making art or products. And then there's different people, so there's the people that work on boat building, or there's the prop makers, or, there's just all different people who make things, and it's all quite hidden, people in manufacturing. So that's like another avenue I'd be really interested in exploring.
What is it that draws you to them? Is it the actual the craft that they're doing, the action, so the dynamism really of their movement? Is it obviously quite a few of them do seem to be situated around boatyards, and is it their setting? I just wondered what it was that drew you to them.
I think it's a sort of feeling that generally in society, people who make things are undervalued. And this goes back to our whole schooling and primary schools and how children are channeled to be academic and how those skills are valued, and how making skills, I suppose, as we've become less of a manufacturing nation, how those skills aren't valued so much, I think, is a general perception. So it's really about finding those people and saying, I see you. Yeah. And the boat building thing is just sort of, I suppose if you do one boat building project, then maybe you get slightly known for that. So
So you get a lot more.
another one comes along, yes.
Yes, I mean, as you say, we are losing a lot of artisans, aren't we? Real crafts, well, real crafts, but crafts such as, I'm going to say old crafts such as boat building and things like barrel making. There's all sorts of things that actually have been traditional crafts, but seem to be very much on the wane. I know I often get a list from, and I think it's from the Crafts Council, of crafts that are actually in danger because there simply aren't enough people out there to continue with them, which is a shame.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's heritage crafts, aren't they? They do a lot
Mm.
around protecting. They've got a red list, haven't they, of things.
Yes, yes.
And I suppose it's just because there's less. I mean, it's sort of tragic, but you can sort of understand why those things go, because there's not a need for the things that they fill the gap for, and because ways of life have changed. But I am interested in that, but I'm also just interested in materiality skill. And I went on a very interesting trip you can go on a tour of the Bentley factory where, which is like really
Mm.
high end, super high tech manufacturing. But in order for people to be able to sort of design and build stuff, even it's going to be built by robots, you have to have material knowledge. And so I feel that's the thing that gets lost and isn't respected. And yeah, so it's kind of that even to build high tech things that we might need in a, high tech future, you have to know about materials and how things can be bonded together or joined together and how things shift and move. And you only really gain that knowledge through making things and understanding the materials that you're working with. And it was very interesting at Bentley because the person that was giving the tour explained that their design department used to be in a separate building from the manufacturing. And then they understood that the designers were designing things that couldn't actually be made because they didn't have the material knowledge. So then they sort of brought a kind of innovation hub closer to the manufacturing floor so that the people that were making the things could have a better relationship and understanding with designers. And I thought that was really interesting.
It's a good idea,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah,
Yes, absolutely. Because not everything that's produced goes into mass production. Generally speaking, if you particularly, I would have thought something like a car, there will be many iterations that will be done during the design of a car that would need to be, there'll be a one-off. They'll require somebody to actually make
that's
you know,
right.
to
Yeah,
mock up that piece.
yeah.
So without those skills, knowing how some material behaves, knowing how to achieve this curve or that opening, then I could well imagine there would be a major problem in bridging that gap.
Yeah, I'm sort of just ultimately fascinated by the making of things, and I think as like people, because we just buy things now, we forget that they've been made. It's,
Mm.
it seems weird, doesn't it? But so that's kind of where my interest lies, and then it's about really finding people who are doing different things, doing different making things, and then depicting those and broadening out that conversation. Yeah.
And I know that you've done a Kids Today project, haven't you, that sort of captures the essence of childhood within the community. How was it working with the kids, and how was it, did you find it a rewarding thing to do?
Oh, that was a really lovely project. So
You enjoyed it.
that came about. So after I'd done a lot of pictures of my family, I have two boys there. So when I was doing that project, they were quite small, maybe I don't know, maybe 8 and 10 or something like that, maybe a little bit older. Now they're in their 20s, so it's quite a long time ago now. But yeah, I did. The kids at that. I live in a little cul-de-sac in southeast London. My kids and lots of neighbours' kids played in the street. It was really, funny and fun. And they used to roller skate and make movies and just have a whale of a time. So I approached their parents to see if their kids would like to be in the project, and which yeah, they were all really keen. They were mostly all keen to be involved. There were some of the boys that were less keen to be involved, but then when they kind of learned that other guys were doing it and there was going to be an exhibition, then they kind of got on. It wasn't then hard to get them on board. I didn't have to try. They just volunteered themselves then. It was quite. I kind of liked how they were all a bit feral when they played in the street, and they used to dress up in like mad costumes and but when they came to, I worked from photographs for that project, so I took their photos, sat at my kitchen table, and I liked the idea that they were different heights, so they were different sizes in the images. But they came all a bit groomed, which was
They
quite
do
fun.
say don't work with kids and animals, don't they?
They were very clean and tidy. And but my work takes ages to do, so that was sort of the beginning of the project. And I captured a few people, and then people had haircuts and different things, and so then I would just grab them in off the street, and then they were a bit more wayward, which is what I liked really, and depicted them at that moment. Yeah, it was nice. It was nice. A lot of those neighbours are still here, so it's like a nice snapshot of time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's unusual, isn't it? Because people do move on quite quickly nowadays. I know that you have taught at quite a number of institutions like the V&A and Westdean College. How do you find that the teaching feeds into your own artistic practice? Is it something that you enjoy? Is it something that you relish, or something that you sort of feel that you have to do?
I do really, really love doing the teaching. I've been doing it for quite a long time now, and I think earlier on it would be quite. I think I started doing it because it was just another, you know, avenue to pay the bills, quite frankly.
Mm,
But over time, I just find I find it really rewarding. I really like sharing my knowledge. And when I started teaching, I was actually teaching handbags. That was what I first did at V&A and Westdean and places like that. And I definitely felt like I kind of gathered this library of techniques in my mind because I was kind of inventing these different ways of making things that I'd come up with to make my designs three-dimensional, to make them real. I'd kind of, had the
yeah.
idea, and then how do I actually make that? And I'd figured out ways of doing that. So I was in, and then they were all just sort of unused, all of those patterns and things. So that was my first foray, I suppose, into teaching, was sharing a bit of that, which I really enjoyed. And yeah, and I really like it now. I think also it's a good counterpart to working on your own. I mean, I really love the sort of meditative slowness of the stitching and making the work, but you're quite isolated when you're doing that. So it's really
Yeah.
great to then get out and meet people. And I can remember also when I was at the beginning stage of making the new flat work, and maybe I would take when I first made those portraits of my kids, which had a lot of text in their hair, I felt like it was the text that was the interesting part of the work. And I can remember going to do an artist talk at a a textile group, and the group were really encouraging to me about the value of the work without the text, which was quite interesting. So that there is a sort of collaboration and a kind of conversations. I'm doing a
Mm,
really nice project at the moment with care charity. So I'm working with people who've been impacted by breast cancer,
oh, yeah.
and we've got a 6-week long course, and then so they're making portraits, and then there's going to be an exhibition in October which is during Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So then that's kind of
Mm.
about awareness and promoting screening. So feels like a really great thing to be doing.
Yes, very
Uh,
worthwhile.
yeah, and just
Mm.
it's just fun. It's fun making art, making textiles. So it's sort of spreading that around a bit. Really, is nice.
And how do you sort of tackle I presume most of them come for a day, do they, or are they longer projects?
Yeah, so it's sort of just it kind of completely depends. So quite often a day class, and I suppose the emphasis is on learning and not about having a finished project
Mm,
or starting a project and getting a few skills and ideas and the technique so that you can, so if it's a short class, that you can then get started and take it away to finish.
mm,
Um, for this a care charity one, that's 6 sessions, so people have longer. And yeah, so it's just different really. But yeah, the I don't really like rushing the work. It's quite contemplative for me, and I feel like the applique part is a bit like making a print or a collage, where you're sort of separating colour and laying those down, and then once it's all tacked together, then the finishing stitches that are holding it together, but also do a bit like doing a drawing in stitch on those layers. And that's really about like closely looking and really enjoying colour and line and things.
mm.
So yeah, so I sort of I don't want really the people to have to dash through it really. That's not really what it's about.
No,
So yeah, so
no.
that's kind of how I tackle it. Mm.
Yeah, no, I just wondered if they were coming to do a particular project or if they were just coming to decide on their own project and have almost a workshop day really where they could just progress rather than finish.
Yeah, so people do like to get finished, and people have busy lives. So sometimes, maybe I teach like a 4-day class at Westdean or something, and people would be hoping to get finished
Mm,
because they've put aside that bit of time, which I do understand. But I try and encourage it about sort of a gathering of the skills. But nevertheless, I do. Usually, people are working on a picture, and I just try and hope that they understand that they will make mistakes, and that will be part of the learning, and then they might have to go again. Um,
yes.
yeah.
I think that's actually, I know with our own students, it's a very underestimated part of learning, making mistakes. There's a sort of assumption, isn't there, that we get it right every time, and if we don't, we failed. But actually, that process, if you do get something, if something doesn't work out, it teaches you an awful lot. It teaches you probably not to do it quite the same way again. But it also shows you perhaps ways of working with whatever you've done, breaking it up, perhaps cutting it up, incorporating it into other pieces. There's a real learning process there that we really don't take away the same things if everything goes perfectly the first time.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, and also I like the idea. I like making, you make a bit of work, and then that whilst you're making it, you maybe wish you'd done something slightly differently, but because of the way it's constructed, you'd have to sort of chuck that out and start again. So just like sitting with that new knowledge that you would do it differently next time, and then trying it that way in the next project so that things can evolve. I like that idea. That so maybe it's not a mistake. It's just that's the way that you've made that bit of work, and then the next bit of work you can make slightly differently.
Yeah.
And then you'll come up against challenges, or you might have thought that you had a mistake in a work, and then you would do it differently next time, and then maybe you won't like how you'd resolved it that time, and you might prefer the mistake in the previous work. I think there's all that
Mm.
goes on as well. You can not like something at the time, can't you?
Oh,
And then
absolutely.
come back
Yes.
to it and think that maybe actually it was really successful. And
Yes. I think often when you because embroidery is about concentrating on quite small pieces at a time, isn't it? So particularly if you're working on a larger piece, I think it's quite possible to be working on a corner of that piece, let's say, not like what you've done. Sometimes you have to put it to one side walk away from it for a while, walk back to it, and to get the overall view of how it might look in context. I think what I'm trying to say is it's easy to get hung up on one bit that you're not happy with.
Absolutely. It's totally easy to get hung up on 1 2 millimeter
Yeah.
stab stitch. I feel it's a bit wonky. Yes, I always encourage my students. I kind of I guess the technique lends itself to putting in and taking out, and I do that as part of my practice, but my stitches are quite lightly placed, and I actually don't really like my stitches crashing into one another, so I don't have too many overlapping stitches, so I do have that, so I am lucky that I can take things out quite easily. But when I'm teaching, I really encourage people to put more in than they take out, because often you get really hung up on a few stitches being a bit wonky. And it's really hard to imagine that once you've got more in, they won't look wonky in the context of the whole work.
Mm.
We get so focused in on that little bit.
And I mean, I again, I always say this to my students, but I imagine it's particularly important with your work that you don't embroider so much that you obscure the background or that you obscure the shapes. It's about being a little bit measured, isn't it? That you enhance but don't overwhelm.
Yeah, I'm all about sort of lightness of touch, I suppose. And I really enjoy the idea of the mind's eye, so that we can, it's quite brilliant, that thing where you can put in just a few stitches and, and it says a mouth
Mm.
where, and I kind of, yeah, I kind of, and then your eye then fills in those elements. So yeah, I really enjoy that. Yeah, keeping maybe, because that leans into that whole discussion about when a work's finished, doesn't it? Which is quite interesting.
Yes. Yes, it
So
does
yeah,
indeed. Do you
so
have any thoughts about when work is finished? What would you advise one of your students?
I like to stop as soon as possible. That's kind of, yeah. If you feel like maybe it's all held together and you've kind of covered any marks that you've used for lining things, and once all your dots are covered and everything's stitched down, then that's your opportunity to stop. So that's usually when I'm stopping, and then I'm stepping back and looking at it. And I think also that comes from, when I was making the handbags, and you were trying to make something in a finite amount of time, because that all lent into the cost of whatever the finished
Mm.
project was, then about sort of having quick ways of doing things. And I mean, that sort of juxtaposition between then and now with this kind of really slow process that I have. But
Yes, it's so I was thinking about that when we were speaking, and it's a really interesting juxtaposition because we talked about, the value, which there is a huge value in slow stitch, in being able to meditatively, I think that's the right word,
yes,
sort of stitch and enjoy that whole process. But then there's a bit of a counterpoint to that, because if you're doing it as part of a business, then obviously you are having to keep a track on the hours that you're spending on it and the materials, the hours. And there is an element of pressure because, of course, you've got to eat, so things have to be sold. Maybe you have an exhibition coming up and you have to fulfill an obligation for that. So it is quite a balancing act, isn't it? I think it's really lucky at the end of that if you still manage to enjoy the process.
yes. I think that's about having long enough lead times, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's what's been nice about this Arts in Residence project that I've been doing is that I knew, so it was a 6 month, I had 6 months, and then with an exhibition at the end during London Craft Week. So that was like my fixed end point that I was working towards. So I kind of, so the project started in November, and then I kind of, because I know my work takes long to make, I kind of thought I need to have landed on an idea in January, so I've got enough time, to create the work for May. Then in that time between January and May, then the project got extended. So that
Mhm.
was very liberating in a way, because I decided that I would, because there were so many, because I was sort of gathering people that I wanted to have on this procession as I went. And I hadn't designed, usually I would design a work and I would sort of know the shape and the size of it, what was what I'd be aiming at the end. I'd kind of know where everything went and I'd just be making it. And obviously you come across artistic decisions as you go within that, but more or less you knew the shape and the layout of the work. This has been a bit different because it's sort of been gathering and I've been meeting people and drawing them and adding them to this line of people as I go. And then there was this opportunity for it to keep going beyond May. So I chose to show the work unfinished. And then I was getting all this feedback that people really like my tacking stitches, which usually I put in
Oh,
loads of tacking and then take it all out. So that's also that hidden work that we do when we're making something that then, I almost take out as much stitching as I put in ultimately because I've got these big
yeah.
stitches. And then I was getting all this feedback that the tacking was really lively and interesting and a great juxtaposition to the the tiny stab stitches. And I didn't disagree. It just felt like a kind of, when you've been working in a certain way for a long time and you wouldn't have dreamt of leaving those in.
Yes.
So I was all about, it had all been about making it look quite pristine, really, I suppose. Yeah, so it was really exciting to show it in that way. So I had one end of this 5 meter long strip that was finished and how I would usually exhibit work. And then the sort of middle section had more tacking left in. And then the end section, people were started but not even finished with all their stab stitches.
Mm.
And I'm not sure that the viewer probably saw that much difference between the pristine end and the work in progress other end.
So what did you take away from that? Will you alter your practice because of that, or?
It feels quite exciting. And always within the process when I'm making, I really love how the work looks before it's stitched at all, when I've cut the shapes and laid them down, but they're not anchored. So I've been interested in that for a long time, but not known what to do with that idea. Yeah.
I suppose it sort of perhaps leads me through to a slightly different question, which is how much planning do you do beforehand? When you're actually putting a piece together, do you do a lot of planning, or do you sort of create templates for yourself? Do you know exactly how it's going to look beforehand, or is it more intuitive? Is it something that just progresses as you work on it?
No, so previously it's been, I have a sort of, I suppose, what would like a weaver, a tapestry artist, I think they call it a cartoon.
Cartoon, yeah.
Yeah. So I would have like a plan. I would have an image that I'm then transferring to the cloth. And it would look quite different because once you start cutting the fabric parts, which for me is partly like the really exciting bit, and laying those down. So you've got the shapes of the person or the object, and then you're experimenting with what layers go where and what colours you might use. And then once that's all arranged and tacked down, then you're doing this stitching, which is like a drawing on top. So there is room and there is a sort of creativity within that space, but it's quite rigid, I suppose. So this, with this new procession of people, I've got the little elements that I'm adding on, but I didn't know at the beginning how that was going to look. I suppose that's the point.
Mhm,
Um,
mm.
yeah, but it's in this. I'm making a drawing. I'm making templates from the drawing, not in the same way that a oil painter would start, or even a watercolorist. I'm not doing like a life drawing where I've started without a plan and I've got a blank bit of textile and I'm just intuitively making stitch marks without any reference or without a 2D reference.
Yeah, mhm. So, how do you find, 'cause I know that you do take commissions, don't you? And I presume many of those will be for portraits. How do you find that process? Because I know when I speak to artists, very often they will either love or hate the commission process. Many will prefer to work on, whatever inspires them at that moment, and others enjoy it. And I just wondered where you found yourself in that spectrum.
So I do enjoy the commissioning process, and it's most successful when the commissioner is really leans into my eye, if that
Mm,
makes sense. So with commissions, sometimes it's really nice if I get. I'm usually working from a photograph or a drawing, so if somebody, so with some of the Kids Today ones and the portraits that came after that, people would bring their kids and I would photograph them and then work for my own photograph. That was really nice. Other times I'm doing commissions where I'm working from other people's photographs, and the more photographs that they give me to choose from, I'm usually more pleased with the result, because I can kind of I like the idea that the person that I'm stitching might be sitting in front of me, so the less animated person is
right.
better. Because I kind of think, if I was sitting in front of you and drawing you, you wouldn't be like having a great big grin, because you wouldn't be able to maintain it. So you'd
Yeah.
have like a relaxed face. So I kind of like my portraits to be that. So if I'm working from a photograph and we've chosen the picture together and it is that, then that's when I think they're most successful and I enjoy it most. And sometimes people commission me to make like a still life or something, and I might just have completely free reign, and I can set that up and do a drawing and then show them the drawing. And then if they're happy with that, then I go ahead and we might have a little bit of discussion about colour schemes or something. Yeah, so sort
Mm.
of work in different ways, really.
And I mean, again, it's a conversation that I tend to have quite often with people that, as well as actually spending time doing your particular art, you also have to spend time on your business, don't you?
Yeah.
On promotion and all of the other things that go along with running a business, doing accounts, all of those sorts of things. Is that something that you enjoy?
I think what I enjoy about being self-employed is I really like the variety of things. I really like learning new things. So that's good, right? But sometimes it does feel heavy, all those other things that you have to do. But sometimes maybe you're not feeling inspired, or your eyes twitching, from too much stitching or something. And it's quite nice to do another part of the business. And I love being self-employed, because I feel like you get when things go right, you get to claim that. You also have to
Get all
claim
the
it when
praise.
you sort of have to claim it when things go wrong as well. So, but yeah, the I like that every day can be different, and that you get to sort of steer how things,
Mm,
you know. No, I don't love doing the accounts, but yeah, I think I like the variety. I do like the variety.
yeah,
Um,
because you have been a part of numerous exhibitions and publications, haven't you? But I just wondered how important those platforms were to you to enable you to sort of, well, make a connection and be visible with audiences.
I think it's really, I definitely need a deadline. I'm not very good at working like in a sort of isolated bubble with no end in sight. Although when I was regrouping and changing my career, I did do that and just made work for myself without a kind of end project. But yeah, I think it's really good to. I mean, I've been going a long time, girl, so that's why I've done so many things, I think. Yeah. I mean, I'm a member of the 62 group, and we have annual exhibitions, and there's a really great rigorous thing where it's 3 strikes and you're out. So if you don't submit or aren't selected for an exhibition for three turns, for 3 successive things, then you forfeit your membership.
Oh, that
Um,
feels a little harsh.
but I do quite like that, and I used to be a bit more worried about it in the past, but now I just kind of figure, you know is it, it just sort of, I think the thing is that we have like themes and ideas, and sometimes that it really lands with what you're doing. So we had an exhibition called Making is Learning at Salts Mill. I think that was
Oh yes, I know
yeah,
salt smell.
yeah. And I'd had this idea that I wanted to dye my own organzas and try that out, but I hadn't done it because I hadn't really, I don't know, hadn't found a space in my practice to do that. Whereas I thought, well, this is the ideal opportunity where I can try that out. I can make this bit of work. I can see how the dye behaves and how light fast it is, and make a piece of work. And it all sort of came together to be like a sort of, to work really, to mesh together,
Mm.
that idea that you could make a new work and trying something out, and then you've got an exhibition, and you've got the new work, and yeah, so that all like landed happily. Yeah.
So when you're actually planning, if you know, for example, that you're doing an exhibition for the 62 group and you have something coming up, would it be fair to say that you then take that as an opportunity to try something different for that particular for the work that you do for that exhibition?
So I suppose I'm saying in that instance that
Mm.
that all landed happily together, and that's exactly what I did. And then other times, maybe there's a thing where the thing you're already working on sits really brilliantly within that, so that's great. And other times it just doesn't land, and you just think, well, I just will sit this one out and hope that the next time, it does resonate.
Something, yeah,
Yeah,
something resonates.
yeah. So,
Mm.
yeah. And also
Um,
I've had work not selected, so that's a bit sad at the time. But maybe it didn't fit with the theme, or maybe maybe it was a time when my work was transitioning and it wasn't didn't the people selected didn't get it, so that, you just have to
mm.
sort of suck that up. And I'm well used to applying to things and not getting selected. I think that's always a good thing to say.
So is there, I mean, that must be sort of quite upsetting, I'm going to say, in that you put a huge amount of work in, and then you get to the selection, whoever it is, an unnamed people or set of people decide that, they prefer someone else's. How do you cope with that? Because I know it's something that our students, we're often trying to encourage them to put in for exhibitions and that sort of thing. And I think it's that puts them off. It's, well, people might not like my work. Well, no, they might not. But that's actually part of the process, isn't it? It's something that you have to learn from and adjust as you go forward. And I just wondered if you had any advice for them.
Yeah, I think because I've been a maker. I've been a maker for like 30 years or something ridiculous. So I've often applied for things and not got selected. And I just think you just got to take it on the chin. You shouldn't stop applying because you've got the work. I mean, you've got the work, so you can put forward the work for other things. And often I've not got accepted on. Sometimes things have rounds, so you might apply the first time and not get in the first round, and then maybe you could get feedback and you could apply again, and then you might get in the next time. So that's good. And then I'm all over making opportunities for yourself. So, if you've got the work, the thing is that you've made the work. And there's so many reasons why things don't get selected. And I've been on selection panels too, and there's so many reasons, and it shouldn't really be a reflection of the quality of the work or the validity of what you've done, but maybe it didn't fit with the theme or the the story the curator was trying to tell, or there's like so many reasons why things might not be selected. And I think it's hard not to take it as a sort of personal.
Yes,
Like,
affront.
which we all do, don't
Yes.
we? I mean, it's still gutting when you don't get into things. And, I still sally forth, and kind of one bit of me goes, "Oh, well, I'm a sure fit for this. This work is a sure fit for this thing." And, because otherwise you wouldn't apply. But then the other bit of my mind goes, I'm not going to get in. So I, I think it's just about holding both of those thoughts, and but that it doesn't it doesn't devalue what you've done, and that you've still got the work, and that you can put it forward for other things or create opportunities for yourself by showing them at an open house or an open studio, or, joining a group and showing together in that way, or putting it on your website, or,
Yes, I mean, do you actually maintain your own website, or is it something that you have someone do for you? Because it's a really nice website. I'd encourage, anybody that's listening to go and have a look at it. It really is very attractive. And I just wondered if you did that, and if you did the photography and what have you, or if that was something you had help with.
So I did my own website, and it's a Squarespace one, if that's helpful for anybody, and I designed it and put it together, and that's one of those learning things that I really enjoy. So being self-employed, you kind of have to take a deep dive and learn how to do that. But I did enjoy doing that, and what's really nice is, because it's mine, I can just edit it all the time, so I can put new pictures up. But I really appreciate the value of professional photographs. So I do have professional photographs taken. And sometimes I find it quite difficult balancing making work, having an exhibition, having the work made long enough in advance to have it
Of course.
framed. Have it,
Mm.
yeah, that's always quite a tension for me. I'd rather be working up to the night before the show.
Yes. Yeah, no, I
Um,
can
yeah.
appreciate. And it's so important, isn't it? Obviously, if somebody is actually not able to come to see your work in person, then they're relying on a website or an image in order to see it. So the photography and probably the framing are really important aspects, aren't they?
They're really important, and I think they really so, for example, if you're going back to that, applying for things, if you're applying for an opportunity and you haven't got professional photographs, then you might just not get they might just not even look at your they might just not even look at your application. So, I think it's quite easy to, your work so well because you've been working on it, and then you take a snap of it and you feel like that represents it. But maybe it doesn't, and professional photography is obviously expensive, so that is like another thing to consider. And I think textiles is really difficult to photograph, so I do have my work professionally photographed. I don't always feel that there's nothing beats seeing the work in the real, you know.
No,
It's
no,
really
of
difficult.
course.
And sometimes actually a photograph that you take on your phone in a lovely light, and I've talked to professional photographers about that. Sometimes that's hard for someone to capture in a studio. So my website has a mixture of professional photographs and things that I've taken with my phone, because sometimes you can get fantastic things just in the moment. But I
Mhm.
think to document your work, it's really important to have professional photographs. And
That's
then,
good.
yeah, but then
It's good advice.
yeah, I think the two can sit together really nicely. And moving image now, everybody needs moving image for social media and everything, and
Yes, video, of course.
video. Yeah.
That's it, isn't it? You find yourself having to be a videographer, a photographer, as well as, the things we talked about, an accountant, social media
Yeah.
expert.
But you can get people to lean in also and help you. So if you are having an exhibition and someone comes, and maybe they'll take, maybe just somebody will come with a lovely camera or take some good pictures, or, and just remembering to ask them to share those with you and things like that is
Mm.
helpful, isn't it? Yeah.
So, what is next? I mean, looking ahead, are there any new projects or themes that you're excited to explore in the year ahead?
Yeah, so I'm at the wharf doing my artist in residence for another 6 months. So this procession, I've got a few more people to add, and then I've got other ideas that I'm probably not going to reveal to you here, Gail. But that,
Oh, okay. Watch this space.
yeah, watch the space. I'm quite excited, and maybe a bit to do with those ideas about the organza when it's cut and not all fixed down, and so exploring that a bit more. So that's really exciting. I feel really lucky to have this time to do that. So that's all going on, and yeah, so more things. Will be a new exhibition with the 62 group next year, and the theme for that is touch lines. So that's really,
Oh, I'm not sure what that conjures up.
yeah,
Sport, I suppose.
different things.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm thinking about that and more teaching and things in between. Yeah,
Mm.
so it's
So
all,
busy
yeah,
year
busy.
ahead.
I love
Yeah.
being busy. I think, yeah, that's the best
Mm.
part. When you're not busy, that's the worst, because then you're worrying about when you're going to be busy again.
Yes, but having your time nicely filled without being overrushed.
Yes.
Which, as you say, comes down to planning a lot of the time, doesn't it?
Yeah, deadlines far enough away. That's what I think is,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love. Yeah.
Emily, thank you so much for joining me today and for telling us so much about your practice, giving us that insight. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Gail. Thanks for having me. Good to chat.